أهلا وسهلا جميعا. Thank you again for attending our public program, Day 3. In the second of our conversations with the artists of the Biennale today, we have Miguel, Payano Jr., in conversation with Jessica Cerasi from the Guggenheim to discuss his work and to discuss his work also in the context of the Biennale. Thank you. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Cerasi. I'm part of the curatorial team for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project. I'd like to thank the Diriyah Biennale for hosting us today and all the team here over the past few days too. I'm here in conversation today with Biennale artist Miguel Payano Jr. And we're going to keep things quite light and informal. So I want to really treat it like a studio visit away from home. So just to give you a bit of background about Miguel and his work, he is an artist based between the Bronx in New York and Beijing. And he has studied at Williams College in the US, at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing, and Hunter College for his second MFA. But interestingly, he brings together a really rich cultural background within his work of being of Afro-Latin heritage, but born in the US and then living the past 2 decades actually in Beijing. So we're going to sort of kick things off today with the work in the Biennale, which I hope you will have a chance to see, or if you're watching at home, will have a chance to see. So if we can just pull up the slide.
Yeah. Before we start, I'd just like to say, please don't feel like you can't engage in the conversation. It's a conversation. We happen to be people with 2 mics speaking the most, but please do join in when you have a question. Oh, and we have a mic runner in case you have a question. So I guess I'll start. Oh. Actually, I want to pause on this, maybe start with explaining with the title. So the piece in the Biennale, my piece is a large-scale painting with 4 pieces. And the original title of the work before I completed it was called Rainbow in the Tempest. And I'd like to explain that a little, sort of thinking about showing work in a Biennale at this time in human history. So the last 2 years, I think, in an unfortunate event of a global pandemic, sort of countries around the world have find themselves in very similar positions. So I was thinking about a Biennale or a large art exhibition is a beautiful moment of contemplation of artworks, but the world is still on fire around us. So thinking that as like a moment of beauty, a rainbow in a tempest. And if you're unfamiliar with the word tempest, tempest is a large, powerful storm at sea. So it's like, raging waves, fire, and a beautiful rainbow appears amongst that. That's the work as it's installed in section 3. And that section is called Peripheral Thinking. I think I was aptly placed in the right section because of my cultural overlaps, sort of seeing myself as being a person of 3 cultures in a way, because of spending significant time in very different cultural, I would say, registers. But that's not how the work began. This was sort of the earlier stages of the work. This is a studio shot of the work in the studio in the Bronx. And then I worked on the piece on and off for maybe, I can't even remember, a few months. It wasn't an everyday thing, but it was there present in the studio.
It's amazing to see because you really see how the colors build up. You get a different understanding of the painting through the process.
Yeah, and also like I didn't know what it was exactly when I began. I started with 2 canvases, and then it became 4 canvases, and then I was thinking, oh, could it be 6 canvases? And then Phil was like, no. Phil is the curator of the Biennale. That's me.
That's what you were thinking.
Yeah.
Is this going to be 6? Do I have to do 2 more?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then that's here. But I guess maybe we can start with some of your direction. And then,
Sure, yeah. I mean, so maybe you could talk us through the painting a little bit and what we're looking at.
So I'm going to probably jump between slides very quickly. If I skip over an image and you want to see it later, we can come back to it, but it's more for reference. So first, let's give it some more context of how I've been working with feet for a while. So usually when I'm painting feet, they're more light-hearted works. But in this work, I wanted to be a little more somber and, contemplative of sort of the moment. I wanted it to be a moment of pausing and sort of reflecting on loss. If you've seen the work, you might have noticed that there are moments where there are these feet here or here. They're not so visible. And in this work, I was thinking about, the work was later titled Ascending Stars. So this idea of things moving up into the sky. So I was thinking about transitioning from this space on Earth to other spaces. And in that sort of metaphor, I tried to create this alliance between feet to butterfly to stars. So by keeping the image or the imagery of the foot as an open sort of line drawing of a foot, I believe that it's more open for interpretation of identity of people. As soon as you have a skin tone, then you start having very fixed associations. So I wanted it to be open. It could be anyone. It could be someone young, someone old, someone you know, someone you don't know. And then I wanted it to be in this tumultuous sort of body of energy. It doesn't necessarily need to read as waves or clouds, or but I wanted it to be overwhelming in a way. That's why in the installation the wall sort of turn in a little concave. I wanted you to feel enveloped in this, imagery. Yeah.
I mean, what I love about it is that it really rewards close looking. So you are struck with this big scene of the sublime, let's say, of an ocean and clouds. But then as you look closer, you see these almost ghostly golden outlines of feet. And then as you look closer still, you notice the butterflies and the connection between each foot has a butterfly. Yeah. And then, maybe another layer of looking is that you notice that there are these stars that are earring studs. Yeah. Punched into the top of the painting. So maybe you could say a little bit about these different signifiers within.
So in a little bit, I'll share more about what my practice is like. So my practice, I would say, is I'm very much into making objects. And it spans the spectrum of painting through sculpture. But I wanted to keep the Biennale piece somewhat simple. So, but the reason why I bring this up is that my practice is very open in terms of what I consider to be an art material. And I do use ready-made objects as another material, just like paint or plaster. So the idea of, this shimmering light or object, I thought, okay, like a diamond, So, but it being something that people, can adorn their body with, returns it back to the body itself. So, you still need the, I guess, literal connection between the transition from foot to sky.
Yeah, and just thinking of this sort of landscape as a metaphor, and the vulnerability of some of them are really very tiny feet in this wave, and I just think we're at this kind of moment in time with the global pandemic ongoing. I mean, we've really all become so much more aware of our vulnerability, of our humanity, of our sort of bodily existence. And I mean, in a way, it's a sort of quite a somber work, but you're able to bring to it this uplifting, really sense of flow, but also kind of playful, cartoonish element.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the end of the day we have to move on and go forward. So I didn't want it to just end at sadness or anything like that. But yeah, the butterflies. I was thinking about the imagery of this tiny little like winged creature crossing over waves. Like at any point, like a wave can crash up against it and destroy it. So I was thinking of sort of how we globally are sort of at the whim to nature. So I thought that was a good way of wording it visually.
Yeah, I mean, and I think with the feet, which obviously appears kind of throughout your practice, you're never quite sure if they're dancing, if they're swimming, if they're drowning. There's always this tension around
maybe.
this body at sea or...
Yeah, sort of go into... I'm just... Please keep on. I just wanted so people have some visual cues for, what...
No, exactly. I mean, there's something very joyous, but there's also something very ambiguous about these legs in the air.
Yeah. I mean, my practice is a practice that uses a lot the part to represent the whole. So I've been using, sometimes it's mouths, sometimes it's legs, sometimes it's hands. But as soon as we see it, we know a human connection to it, so we don't necessarily need the whole thing. So, yeah.
But also, I mean, you have a very distinctive painterly style. I mean, I feel like I could now recognize Miguel Payano work at a distance. But it is this kind of very unique melding of a sort of, let's say, Chinese landscape painterly tradition and a sort of Walt Disney cartoon pop language.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I'm glad you brought up sort of Chinese landscape. So, until recently, I'm stuck in America right now, but until recently, I had been living in China for close to 2 decades, and a lot of times people ask why, but at the beginning of a practice, when you're expecting to make no money, you have to think about practical things like rent, space, and time to make work. And then I was fortunate enough to have studied the language at an early time in my development that I realized that I could be in Beijing and carve out 40 hours a week with a few hours of work. So being from New York, I knew it would be impossible. I'd need 2 jobs to try to work in the studio 1 hour or something. But the being in that culture, immersed in that culture for such a long time, you absorb things, and I absorbed a lot of like visual motifs, subject matter, considerations, more consideration to line and mark making than like volume and metric forms. So,
yeah, I've seen you describe it as a sort of triple consciousness that you bring to your work.
Yeah.
So, coming from a Dominican heritage, growing up in the U.S. and then being based in China. How do you think that sort of informs your practice?
I mean, it informs me in that I'm aware that I can't take any understanding for granted. I don't try to assume that I know what the viewer is going to think or how they're going to approach something or where they're going to come from, because we have all these different cultural registers for seeing and understanding the world. So, you know, when I was born in New York, I could see that I was speaking a different language, looking very different, and that made me very aware that, oh, there's more than one way of considering what, you know, how to move around the world. So that made me aware of like being able to step back from what you assume to be, you know, up or down or left or right.
Right.
You know? So it's just a different way of navigating, I guess.
Well, and also seeing how there are sort of different cultural lenses that you can step into.
Yeah.
And, you know, these different codes that operate, but it's not the same necessarily elsewhere.
Yeah. Or the possibility for like tangential meaning where, you know, this one thing could mean two different things at the same time, and sort of being aware of that and seeing if I can create interesting collisions of, you know, ideas or like even engagements with people, like two people from different cultures looking at a work and sort of reacting to it differently, and then from that maybe they engage in a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, because I guess it's not just a triple cultural consciousness, but also a triple linguistic consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think the way you use language within your work is really interesting.
Yeah, let me see if I have anything that can, I'll come back to this. Anything that okay. So in this piece, this is a painting from a recent show that I had in LA. And on the top, in Chinese, it's written 八通大门, or it just says 八通大, but it's on a men or a doorway. So the idea that I was trying to like sort of depart from was, you know, this feeling that most parents would have for their children. It's like you want the world for them, you want everything for them, you want them to be the best at everything. So I was thinking of like, what is that portal? What is that gate? You know, so ba would mean 8, and tong means like clear path. Damen is usually just large door. And that's the door of like a gate to a park, a public space. So it's like, this is the door for everything being good for you, you know?
Oh, wow.
So that's sort of how I was thinking about it. But then the point where there's that sort of interaction between language for me is the dragonfly. So, you know, in China, there's this idea of long, or the dragon being, you know, the emperor or the power sign. So there's that linguistic overlap between English, which is, you know, dragonfly. So take off, young prince or whatever. But in Chinese, it's qianting is the way you would say, you know, dragonfly. But so it's like the Chinese meaning is in the English reference as opposed to the other way around. Yeah.
Well, and I guess these sort of collisions in language give you this platform to generate these sort of really sort of surreal and
Strange.
unusual visuals.
Yeah. So let me give you another example of.
Maybe can we look at one of the sculptural pieces?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll.
Yeah, or these reliefs.
Yeah. Maybe I think this one might be the easiest one to sort of explain another point of interjection. So the light bulb there, it's like when I see this, for me, it's a head, it's a bust of a person. So you have the peach, which is the mouth, and then the sort of sideburns to a bald head. Now the light bulb is like the bright bald head. I'm sure that I'm blinding some people right now. The bright bald head, right? But that at the same time, the light bulb is, you know, the metaphor, the symbol for an idea. So, and then at the same time, you know, the bottom of the bulb is like acting as like the pupil of an eye. So in that moment there, this one thing is both the idea, the bald head, and an eye. So that those points of multiple intersection of things, I think it's something that I became very aware of because of moving between all these cultures. Yeah.
I mean, I should just say, because I mean, I've found it very hard to understand these works in the kind of 2D. And so maybe it sticks out from the wall. This isn't painted. There are these sculptural elements. So it's...
I don't know if that registers. So when you read the work, you can look at them like a painting, but you can turn to the side and look at them like something else. So they sort of start breaking apart and dissolving in front of your eyes when you're looking at the works. I don't know if you can see it in here, but there's also like another peach in there with a mouth that's smoking a cigarette and like sticking out from there.
I mean, maybe tell us a bit about the mouth peach, because I know that comes up a lot within your practice.
Let me go back to maybe a simpler image of the mouth peach. I'll start with this. So, you know, when you're engaging in different cultures, a lot of people, I needed a simpler way to think about people, because I'm thinking about people engaging with people, and I wanted to talk about the relationship of that. So I came up with this idea or this image of a mouth on a peach, almost like a single-celled human. The most simplest forms of life are like amoebas, and they basically eat and defecate. And I think, you know, all life probably does that. So if we were a single-celled human, we'd still need to accomplish those two goals. So I thought a peach would be a funny way to sort of incorporate that. Mm-hmm. And then by that, I can then start having like more complicated situations where there's this, I don't know if you can sort of get it, but like this piece is called Three Heads. So there's an outline of one head here, another outline of another head here, and then another outline in the center. And then the mouths are both eyes and mouths. I don't know if you can see it now. Mm. And then in those three profiles, there's different spaces, there's different landscapes. So it's like everyone's occupying their own territory in a way. But in this moment, they're intersecting. And I'm trying to think about, you know, the relationships that people have between other people they meet and how those relationships help create who you are. You know, individualism is this really made up thing, I think. No one's really an individual. I think everyone's the byproduct of all the other people you've met. But, you know, everybody's a different combination of different people, so mm-hmm. you could say individual, but, yeah.
Well, I think that really comes through in your work. I mean, mm-hmm. particularly this one, this kind of layering of imagery, mm-hmm. but also of found materials, mm-hmm. of painted aspects and sculptural ones. Mm-hmm. But I mean, what I really enjoy about your work is that it's almost like Russian dolls. You know, you see one thing at first, and then you sort of, there's so much to then unpick, and you know, to think about each element as a sign or a different word in the story, and the sort of narrative or character that builds up. This is one of my favorites, actually.
Sort of talking on that point there, sort of how there's signs. And so one phrase that I came up with, or I think about the work as, is a constellation of signs. Mm-hmm. So if I take different objects and I sort of bring them together, then they start creating a network of possible meanings. So for this piece here, I call it Sugar High. And what I think of is like a very young child, maybe that's consumed too much sugar, and they're very sort of excited and sort of eagerly running around and jumping around. And then I start, is that being the point of departure, then it becomes a way to sort of create a story and point to different things. So I'll start just pointing to things out. Like, you know, toy cars, it's still connected to the idea of youth. But then you have the phrase motor mouth, you know, where someone was running their mouth. And then again, like this idea of like, you know, please be quiet, zip your lip, but they're so energized that they you know, they just like want to make sounds like, ooh, you know, maybe they've seen something across the room that's very excited and interesting. And then like, you know, those were the hands that I've casted of my nephew, my younger brother's son. and they're holding half-cut Coca-Cola bottles. So this idea of consumption is there, and then again light bulb bottoms of this overly charged youth, and again these little birds that are coming in and out of the head, and like a twisted body of energy.
Yeah, you really get the sense it can't sit
Yeah,
still.
it can't sit still, jumping around. And then, when I was making this, I changed the stem of this to be clear because I wanted to somehow get this idea of it like floating or jumping around kind of feeling. So, see, there's another one, another sort of sculpture. So this one is, I think it's a special one for me. I call this one Buen Mai, which in Spanish is, or in my version of Spanish, it's good mother. So the mouth peach here is an actual ready-made peach that I then took a cast, which is like a mold of someone's mouth, and then I adhered it to this peach. But the mouth is of my mother-in-law, who's Chinese. So, but the skin is not that of a Chinese person. So in that moment, I kind of felt like both my mothers, both my actual mother and then my mother-in-law. So then I started thinking more about mothers in general and sort of how they're giving and sort of like fruit, So I started thinking about these light bulbs as being like kind of hanging grapes of just generosity that mothers are always giving. Believe it or not, the cheeks are actual chicken thighs, a real chicken that I've preserved in a special method. The chicken is actually older than the sculpture because I was making experiments with the chicken in 2018 and probably finished the sculpture like 2020 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the eyes, I don't know if you've noticed, they're sharks, toy sharks. So, mothers can be very fierce, when protecting their children, like a bear mom will maul anyone down if they get between her and her cub. So I think that power of mother is also important to sort of incorporate in the work.
What did your mother-in-law make of it?
I don't think she's actually seen it, and I think she'd probably be a little disturbed if I told her that was her mouth. So, yeah.
No, but I think maybe before we open it up to questions, maybe you could just say a little bit about the place of humor in your work, because that seems so integral. Yeah,
I know that part of the beginning of the talks was pretty serious, but humor is a very important part of my practice. Because I feel like if I'm in the studio and it's making me laugh, it's probably interesting. And it's also just a good entry point. I think it's easier to have serious conversations about serious topics if they're more lighthearted. So if you can laugh about it, it's easier to sort of want to continue talking about it. So yeah, humor is definitely a guiding source of my practice. Let's see if there's anything else that I want.
Well, I think it can just be a very powerful way to connect. And also, sometimes to deliver a kind of more punchy message if you hide it in the humor.
Yeah, for
People
sure.
are sometimes more willing to engage.
Yeah, for sure. I guess like these might be an example of, it's like, so if the peach is a single-celled human, then maybe a peach tree is like a community of people, right? And a community, you have all kinds of people engaged in their own private unions or conversations. So and this work is, to give you a sense of scale, it's a small work. It's maybe like 60 centimeters in diameter. So they're very intimate works, and also this is again playing with this idea of am I going? Yes. Of actual trompe l'oeil, like it's a ready-made that I add to it, and then it casts a shadow on the peaches. So then, and then some of the shadows are painted. So you start thinking about, what am I looking at? Am I looking at a painting or am I looking at the object? So it's questioning sort of where to see, which is also part of the process, sort of like having to reorientate your visual register. Like, am I looking at something flat, or is it 3D? Or I feel like that's a good space to be in when making work as well. Yeah.
Well, it's often a space that you're in when you travel, I think, or when you're sort of out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. I mean, I think earlier before we started the conversation, I think it was you that was saying that I should bring up the idea of like why feet and like how, like why an outline of feet. When I was invited to be part of the Biennale, I was like, okay, what am I going to make? And why do I want to make what I make? And I started trying to learn about the region. And, I was like, all right, I'm going to paint feet. Feet, I do feet, that's good, But then I started looking into symbols and what things mean, and the one thing that I came across was this, I don't know if it's custom or cultural like symbolism of like feet being pointed at people being an insult or rude in the region, and I was like, oh God, like, oh no, like of all the things that I chose like the specifically wrong thing to be pointing at people. So, and then I had to like dial it back, and I kept on asking. I'm like, are feet okay? Can I paint feet? And people were like, oh, it's no problem, it's okay. But I was like, I don't know. Maybe they're being polite. Maybe they're being polite and letting me like paint feet, even though it's wrong. So that was a consideration for sure when I was making it. So the feet are in part dialed back down because of that. I'm like, I'm not so in your face with the feet,
But it's interesting that gave them a sort of spectral quality that I think it's also...
Yeah, I know. I've done outlines of feet before, so it's not like I was doing something completely new, but basically it's like going back to the thing. When you enter a new space, you can't assume that up is up and down is down. You need to find out what are the navigations for that space. Like, where is your up? Where is your down? And I don't think there's like a right or wrong to that. It's just, an environment. So that's something that I definitely like to consider when engaging people, because having met so many different people, and like there's some customs that I do in China that I definitely don't do with my parents, and things that would be considered rude in one space are perfectly polite in another space. So once you're used to sort of that sort of constant adjustment and code switching, then you realize, well, it's not just you or this culture or that it's like every culture, So I think it's important, especially in this world where we're becoming more and more connected to each other, to become more aware of like these subtleties and not assume that we're definitely on the same wavelength or something.
Oh, great. Well, I'd love to open it up to questions if anyone
And
has.
there's no wrong or right question, and no stupid question at all. So you can, please don't be shy about asking anything.
Thanks, Miguel. I have a couple of questions for you.
All right.
I seem to have a couple of questions all the time. I'm interested because when you have parts of the body, there's an aspect of sensuality that comes out. And particularly, actually, your choice of peach is an interesting one. Because even though you think about it as a kind of single cell representation, a peach is very sensual, it's very luscious. And the fact that you're also, matching that with lips. I'd like to, it would be great if you could elaborate a little bit, because even feet, forget the context of feet within, let's say, the space of the Middle East. But feet are actually quite sensual. They can be considered quite sensual. And even in the kind of the way that you paint them and like the positions that they kind of take, there is that kind of aspect of something that's a little bit more, it's more curved. It's like, and you didn't really touch upon that. So I'd be interested to see if that's actually a something that's intentional or something that I'm saying that as and why.
For sure, it's part of the work. I mean, I'm a seductor, or I attempt to be a seductor with images. I'm in the way that I want to lure your eyes. I want you to look at the object or the thing that I made, and you can suggest that by color palettes, forms, shapes, and things like that. So it's definitely, that sensuality is there. And you're right. I mean, like, I'm sure everybody in this room has seen wrinkled fruit, right? Like when it gets old and it looks like skin. You're like, Grandpa, like, so there, it's, it's a peach, but you've seen that skin before. And then like fruit, no peach is the same. It's like they grow on the same tree, but no peach is the same. They have individual, like, patterns. They have fur, like light skin, like peach fuzzy, So there's definitely a sensuality to it. I mean, the reason that the peach is an emoji for certain things is not, something that we don't register or understand. But in the context of culture, peach is also a special magical fruit in Asia. So peaches are often found in folklore and stories of like the magical fruit of longevity. You eat a peach and you live forever. So, you have all these triggers, and then all these, again, intersections of potential meanings, and that's why it became very particularly interesting to me to use the peach. But yeah, sensuality is definitely a part of it, and ambiguity also. Like I think it's something that you mentioned. With the legs, are they tortured? Are they relaxed? When things are sort of in that questionable space, I think there's more room to consider and interpret what you're looking at, and that's really ultimately where the best art is. The best art is not the thing I made. The best art is the thing you're thinking in your head. So if I can get you to that place where you're thinking, you could do the rest. So, yeah.
I mean, that brings me on to the next question.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to understand how people approach and understand your art when they're viewing it in Asia, within an Asian context, because obviously having had lived in Beijing and, showcased your work there, versus people's interpretations or exposure to the work, let's say in the US, because you've obviously done some shows of late in the US. I'm interested to hear from you, like when you speak to the people who come and view your work, the different feedback and the kind of different sort of cultural understandings or cultural interactions that can come up, because I think it's very interesting that you have this multifaceted cultural identity. And I'm interested to understand how different cultures and where you showcase your work also interact with your work.
We see what we know. So that's the beginning of the thing. If we don't know it, we won't be able to see it. So even if it's there, if we can't identify it, we're blind to it. This is a phenomenon called aspect blindness. So for example, I don't want to get too like theoretical, but there's this guy, he was a philosopher, Wittgenstein, and he was playing with this idea of like duck rabbit. So it's this, if you can imagine an image that you can see as a duck or an image that you can see as a rabbit. Now, if you come from a planet where there are no ducks, you won't see the duck. Vice versa, if you come from a planet where there are no rabbits, you won't see the rabbit. Now, how does that apply to us? Now, in America, people would be like, oh, those are some interesting apples that you have there. And like, why did you put a mouth on an apple? In Asia, that would never happen. No one would be like, that's an apple. They're like, you have to ask? Of course that's a peach, So that's what I mean by register, in terms of like, if you're already primed to see it, these markers, then they'll become apparent to you. But if you're not, you're going to miss out. Now, for me, if I, having the benefit of like engaging in multiple cultures, maybe I see 3 things or something at a moment, and like sometimes people don't, and I'm okay with that, because sometimes I don't see the thing either, because I've been in a situation where it was a Japanese speaker I made a sculpture and the nose was flowers. So the 2 nostrils were flowers. And she was like, oh, are you referring to the Japanese thing like hana? Hana is flower, but it also means smell. I was like, no, but I am now, So it's like, again, you see what you know. So in different spaces, the culture will definitely inform the eye. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, or anyone?
Hi, thanks, Miguel. Your artwork is so interesting, and
Thank
I was
you.
just curious to know, with all of these different characters that you create, you really get a sense that each one has a story and a different environment that they almost exist in. And I was wondering how much of that comes from, inspiration from people around you, like your mother-in-law, or how much of it is, scenarios that you envision and imagine, kind of new worlds, like the amoeba and the single-celled human.
Yeah. I mean, a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes it's just like nature, like, oh, let's see, or let me get to, okay, right here, you can see it on this one. So, I'm thinking, I'm trying to live through the peach, right? So I'm like, if you're a peach on a limb, hanging out, like, how do you wash your mouth? You know what I mean? Like, you don't have hands, so like, how are you brushing that? You got to do it. So I started imagining like, what do we put in our mouths? We put toothbrushes in our mouths. So that's an actual toothbrush head that I like turned into a bee, and I started thinking about like guppies, how guppies and like sharks, little fish that swim in and like clean the mouths of the sharks, or there's birds that do it for crocodiles too. So I created this microecology of like, I call them, what did I call them? Brush bees, so they just buzz around and enter the mouths of the peaches. So some of it is just sort of like trying to answer silly questions, and then trying to find some sort of logical answer to this silly question. And other times it's, the object will determine where you go. Let me see if I have an example. Maybe not this one. Okay, yeah. So for this piece, I don't know if you can read it well, but that's like a microphone. The plug for like headphones or microphones and stuff. So I started thinking about, okay, what is identity, can we construct our own identity, how much choice do we have in this? And then, okay, if the marker of the peach is like a single-celled person, can we be a different person at a different time? How does that work? And then really, how does that work if a peach is a human, like how do you attach? So I was like, oh, maybe it's like, it's still a branch, but maybe it's like the microphone, you just plug into the peach and you can speak through it or something, And I'm sure everybody in this room takes on different roles at different times, It's like, are you talking to your boss? Are you talking to your friend? Are you talking to your spouse? And different aspects of yourself will come out more pronounced. So, I think it might be about that. It could be about something else. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to explore this whole world of signs and characters and imagery that you've created. So I do encourage you to go and see the work in the Biennale if you haven't already. But thank you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.